Jason released his Big 12 predictions right here on the show last week. He had Kansas battling it out with Baylor for the Big 12 championship. No, you gotta check out the predictions just in case. You never know. So maybe Jason's throwing a wild card at us. We'll see. So check out the predictions on the Big 12 from Jason last week, and now Jason is unveiling his top 25. Are you ready to roll here, Jason?
Yes. No, I'm
righty.
All right.
Do you want to start from the bottom?
Yeah, we can start from the bottom.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. So as you guys know, we unveiled our top 25, Mark and I, together early on in the spring, and after a lot of intel and a lot of there's some that probably didn't move that much, and there's some that moved a little bit more. So again, this is where I see them right now. These teams right now, not the trajectory of the season or what could or could not happen based on their schedule. This is really kind of my thoughts initially. So at number 25, I have Louisiana return, I believe, 10 starters on offense. Levi Lewis is, I believe, at least a three-year starter at the quarterback position. They play in a conference that allows them to have a lot of success. So Louisiana starts at number 25 for me, facing Texas early on in the season. Number 24, I have Arizona State. I know they have some of the recruiting stuff that's looming over the program just in general. Jaden Daniels, one of the best quarterbacks, maybe that a lot of people don't necessarily know about in the country. So I think Arizona State has an opportunity to be a lot better. If you guys go and watch Mark's interview with Josh Pate from Late Kick, they talk a lot about the Pac-12. Not only this year, but historically, I think the Pac-12 will be a lot better this year than they have been traditionally, at least over the last few years. Number 23, I have Texas, down a little bit from where I had them, kind of in the preseason. I believe I had them in the spring, I should say. I believe I had them top 20. I think for me, what's a little bit of concerning, just looking at Texas, the fact that they haven't named the quarterback, and I don't know if that's Sark trying to keep that close to the vest a little bit with Louisiana and Arkansas looming early, or if it's just one of the two. Hudson Card, Casey Thompson has not solidified themselves as that guy as of yet. So given a week, just a week out before their first game, that concerns me a little bit on the outside looking in, and I think the wide receiver depth is a little bit of a concern as well for them. So I've got them just on the edge here at number 23. Number 22, I have Indiana. Michael Penix Jr., his health coming back into the 2021 season, I think is a big is a big indicator exactly how good of a season they have. They got a couple of tough tests early on. I believe they go to Iowa the first game of the year. They host Cincinnati in the non-conference as well. So the Indiana could be a team this year that is a little bit better. However, their schedule may be a little bit more difficult for them coming into the 2021 season. And number 21, I have Washington. I think they're going to be much improved defensively. I think they have a schedule that sets themselves up, especially in conference play. Big non-conference game at Michigan. Both of those teams are, that could be a game, Mark, that you see the winner of that game kind of bolster them through the conference season between Washington and Michigan, which I believe is the third week of the season. Then we go at number 20, Coastal Carolina, incredibly talented team. One of the best, offensive and defensive teams from a mid-major perspective. At number 20, return almost everyone from a year ago. Their schedule again sets up fairly well for them. Although they do have a very tough test early on against Kansas. I'm not at home, so that'll be something to look at for them. But yeah, no, I think they have an opportunity to go undefeated, once again in the regular season like they did last year. And I got Utah at number 19. Utah is a team that I like a lot. I think in the coaches poll, Mark can probably correct me here. I think in the coaches poll, they're unranked. If I remember right, in the AP, they're towards the bottom. But I think Utah is a team that I like a lot. Traditionally they've struggled from a downfield passing perspective. But I think that having Brewer as part of that team coming over from Baylor this year, I think will help in that perspective. TJ Pledger coming over, it's a team that's gotten really a lot better through the transfer portal. So I think that's a team that could very easily be your Pac-12 champion this year, or at the very least play in that Pac-12 championship game. At 18, I have Florida down a little bit from a lot of other folks. I'm not sold. Not sold on Emory in terms of the quarterback perspective. I've heard some things just in terms of the offensive line that's a little bit troubling early on in the season. I've heard some, that they're kind of going from a skill set perspective, going more towards, what you would have seen kind of in a Tim Tebow type of Florida offense, more of a kind of a ground and pound, offensive philosophy for Florida, but not sure they've got what it takes to be there. And 18 is not bad. Probably a 9-3, 8-4 season's what I'm looking at for Florida here. Number 17, I have Iowa. I think a lot of Iowa, what they have kind of falls on the the right hand of the quarterback. I think they played, they struggled the first couple of games, and then they ended in a very strong way this past year. They've, like we talked about earlier, with Indiana, they have a tough matchup early on in the year. They've got two really tough games, so I think the trajectory of their season, Mark, really is going to be big in terms of that game against Indiana and then against Iowa State the next week. And then number 16, I have Penn State. If you've listened to Josh at all, he's got Penn State in his top 10. Not quite that high, but I think they're going to be much more improved this year. Certainly could see a 9 and potentially a 10-1 season at the Penn State. But I think that's a team that is going to be much better than they were last year. Number 15, I have Miami. When you look at Miami, very similar to how you look at Indiana, just in terms of how healthy is that quarterback coming into the season. In this case, De'Aaron King. Certainly, you have a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball. At skill positions, I think the question for them has been defensively. How are they able to stop? Are they able to stop some of these other teams, especially in the ACC? Comes early on with Alabama. I know that we'll get into some discussion like that. Discussion early next week. But I think that game has the opportunity to be closer than a lot of people think that it will be starting the season. So Miami at 15, USC at 14. I think offensively they've got tons of weapons. Keaton Slovis, they've got Keontae Ingram in terms of that transfer from Texas. So I think they have the opportunity. I think the big thing is, do you trust the head coach? Do you trust him to be able to get USC back to where they were? Do they have an opportunity to get into that playoff discussion? It's certainly a team that could, but it kind of remains to be seen. But they're loaded with talent all across the offensive side of the ball. LSU at number 13. I think LSU is. I'd like to see them be much more improved than they were last year. I think you've got you've got a team that showed some signs late in the year last year in terms of their improvement, just in terms of specifically that win against Florida and some things. I think they'll take a little bit of a step forward. Not sure exactly if they're in the class of are they quite in the class of a Texas A&M and certainly in Alabama and a Georgia? Not sure that they're quite there, quite yet, but I think they'll be much improved in that top 15. Number 12, I have Wisconsin. I think what's intriguing about them is Graham Mertz, the guy that we saw the very first game of this season that just completely lit up Illinois, or is he the kid that came after post-COVID and just really wasn't the same guy? So, I think their schedule sets up very well for them to certainly win that side of the conference and maybe facing Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. I think certainly they'll battle Iowa for that title on that side of the Big Ten. At number 11, I have Notre Dame. I know there's watching your show, Mark, and seeing some of the other folks around the country. Maybe there's two ways to look at Brian Kelly naming Jack Cohen the quarterback early on in the season, or early on in the fall camp. Is it the guy? Is he just that much better than everyone else? Some of the younger kids, or is it just kind of a lack of talent that they've had there? So got Notre Dame at number 11, just outside of the top 10, but I think they have an opportunity to get there, certainly. So as we get into the top 10, I got Cincinnati at number 10. I think if Cincinnati is a team that can go undefeated, then I think we'll see them in the college football playoff this year. So I think it kind of, it does have an opportunity to kind of dispute the fact that there's not a path for a G5 team, to make it to the playoff in the current structure. Now, a win against Notre Dame, a win against Indiana, away from Cincinnati, speaks dividends in terms of what they would be able to do. They've got UCF in the conference slate, which seems to be probably their only hurdle there. So Cincinnati there to start off the top 10. Oregon at number 9. I think, Mark, maybe they're a quarterback away from being a perennial national championship contender. I think they've got loads of talent at the running back, at the wide receiver position as well. Defensively, I think they'll be the best defensive team Oregon has had since in maybe forever. I think Kayvon Thibodeau is one of the best defensive players in the country overall. So I think they've got a lot of pieces. I think it remains to be seen if Anthony Brown can be that guy, or does one of their true fresh or the redshirt freshmen come in and make that jump for the first starter. So I think they'll start with Anthony Brown and just kind of certainly see how that works in game 1 against Fresno State, and it's got to be ready. Whoever that is got to be ready in game 2 as they go to the horseshoe. At number 8, I have North Carolina. I think a lot of I think the good thing, when you look at the good thing about North Carolina, certainly Sam Howell, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, maybe the best quarterback in the country. And then you've got all 5 offensive linemen returning. I think the big question mark for them is at the skill position. Ty Chandler comes over from Tennessee. I think he's going to shoulder the load. I think from some of the things that I've heard, I think that they're very, very intrigued, very happy with what they have going on at the wide receiver position. So big game for them to start the season, go to Blacksburg to face Virginia Tech. So they're a team that I think has the opportunity to at least challenge Clemson in the ACC. Not sure if they'll be there, but we'll certainly get that question answered during the totality of this year. And number 7, I have Iowa State. Again, really haven't changed my view of them from the spring to where we're at now. I think they are certainly loaded at both sides on both sides of the ball. They don't have a lot of. I think that the big question mark is Brock Purdy able to make the jump to be an elite quarterback in college football. I think he's a really good quarterback. Can he be elite? I think the things that you saw in the Big 12 championship game in terms of him turning the ball over, 3 interceptions against Oklahoma, can he cut those mistakes out in a big game? Certainly played much better against Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. So I think they're right there again. Really early season tough matchup against Iowa. How do they deal with how do they deal with everybody patting them on the back? How do they deal with the notoriety being preseason top 10 for the first time in program history? Number 6, Texas A&M, recently named Haynes King as the starting quarterback. I think they've got one of the best defenses in the country, certainly the SEC. Offensive line is probably the biggest question mark. They've got 4 guys that they're replacing. You hear that possibly they might be even better than last year with some of those kids that are coming in. But I think they are obviously your number 1 legitimate challenger to Alabama in the SEC. So going into our top five. So number five, I know that we have Georgia listed here twice. I have Oklahoma at number five. So no worries. I had it. This was a kind of a late change for us, and really the difference here. And just I know we'll probably get the comments will start lighting up here. But so as I look at this today, I'm not sure exactly what the rotation will be from the running back perspective. Can Eric Gray, can Kennedy Brooks stay healthy? If they can, then I think Oklahoma's more in the range of a 2 or a 3. If they can't, if Oklahoma starts getting into a position where they're going to have to look at some depth issues. How does Lincoln Riley change the offense? Do they play a little bit differently? What does that look like? So as the season goes on, I could certainly see moving Oklahoma back up to that 2 and 3 area. But as of right now, I have to have Oklahoma at number 5, really in just an uncertain situation for the running back position. Number 4, I have Ohio State, and I think that there's no additional questions. I'm more convinced that they're going to be fine on the offensive side of the ball. C.J. Stroud is a guy that I think is going to be fine. Offensively, I think the wide receiver position is the deepest in the country and the most talented in the country. I think defensively, there's some questions in the linebacker and the secondary position for Ohio State, but I think those are the only 2 areas, and I'm not sure specifically early on and maybe late in the season if there's anyone in the Big Ten that's going to be able to challenge them vertically. Certainly Oregon may be able to do that, but in conference play, I don't know that I have a lot of confidence in anyone that's able to challenge them. Maybe a Penn State could do that, but early on, I think they'll be able to kind of shoulder the load until they get maybe a little bit more solidified in that back 7 of the defense. Number 3, I have Georgia.
Oops.
Oh, go ahead, Mark. Oh, okay. Number 3, I have Georgia. I think top to bottom, they could be the most talented team in the country. Some of the injuries that I've seen and heard about early on in the year, in fall camp, I should say, are a little bit concerning in the secondary, and then certainly Eric Gilbert's away from the team, I believe, still. Just because of some personal issues that he's having off the field. So I think a couple of those things that I was, really almost prepared to have them number 1 going in. I think I put them back a little bit just because of some of the injuries I've seen early on. Number 2, I have Clemson. And again, for you guys watching, I think I feel so strongly, and I think he put Josh Pate put the nail on the head, hit the nail on the head, just in terms of, the competitive balance that we've seen, maybe even within the top 5 is not the same as what we've always seen in the past. So I think Oklahoma and Clemson certainly could be interchangeable, and what that looks like. The concern that Oklahoma has at the running back position, I think Clemson has that same concern at the quarterback position. If DJ goes down, I think you've got a lot of problems behind them. So I think if you look at those 2 positions, I think they're very interchangeable. You could certainly make a case where Oklahoma's still number 2 and Clemson is still number 5, or is number 5, or even lower in that because of that. But I think they'll be fine they've got great running backs. They've got a lot of good wide receivers. Defensive line is going to be one of the best in the country, if not the best in the country. So I think they'll be fine defensively. So it's just a matter, can they stay healthy on the offensive side of the ball? And offensive line, they've gotten a little bit they've gotten exposed to a certain extent in some of those playoff games, a couple specifically they did last year against Ohio State. So, what does that look like? Again, very much similar to the discussion that we have with Ohio State is, do they have anyone on their schedule outside of the initial game against Georgia that's going to challenge their offensive line early? I don't think so. Even probably more so on Clemson's side than Ohio State. And number one, I have Alabama still, and I just have Alabama just from a respect perspective. Not to say that I think that they belong at number 5, but a team that has been able to churn out talented seasons year in and year out. I think you've got to put them at number 1 from my perspective, just because of what they've done. I think you look at them; they'll be a little bit different, especially early on. I think they'll rely on their defense a little bit more than they maybe have in the past. Mark, I think they're stronger on the defensive side of the ball than they've been in the last couple of years, and that's saying a lot. I think they gave up about 19 points a game last year, still a top 20, top 30 defense. However, I think they're a little bit better on the defensive side of the ball, and so I think that they're going to look at relying on the defense to carry them, maybe to a certain extent, maybe not necessarily carry them, but because I think that offense will sputter just a little bit early on. I think just to expect them to roll out there and be dominant early on and be as good as they were last year, I think is unreasonable. Now, certainly, I think they could get there by midseason, but I watch out for that. Watch out for the game, certainly against Miami, but watch out for Florida in week 3, and I think week 6 they go to Texas A&M. So, can they be solidified enough offensively by then? You would probably think so. Certainly not at the level that they were last year, but I think good as they need to be in terms of how good that defense is going to be.
Jason's top 25 to begin the season, and while the Clemson-Georgia matchup in particular, but also UCLA and LSU and the Alabama-Miami matchup are gaining most of the attention, and that's understandable. Number one, that Georgia-Clemson game, you're involving 2 top 5 teams, and the other ones are interesting from the standpoint of seeing teams play that don't normally play. 3 of the games that stand out to me, especially, and it comes to mind when I look at your rankings, are 3 games involving kind of tier 2 to tier 3 teams that are matched up in week 1, and 2 of them are conference games, and it's really an opportunity for one of those 2 teams, the winner of that game, to make a statement, to take on a really good team and to say, maybe we've separated ourselves and we can challenge the elite in this conference. And those games are Penn State and Wisconsin play Camp Randall Stadium in week 1. And so you've got 2 teams ranked, depending on your poll, and if you're looking at Jason's right now, 12 and 16 in the nation. So even though December's a long ways away, who's going to take that first step toward getting a spot in Indianapolis? And that's a huge barrier, a huge game for each one of them, not to get that first loss in the loss column, because you can't have too many of those if you want to make the conference championship game. It's usually 2 max. The other one like that, of course, in conference play in the Big Ten is Iowa, Indiana. So it's a huge week in the Big Ten. And again, Iowa, Indiana, very close to each other, regardless of your rankings. And we'll get to see which team, at least at this stage of the season, is a cut above the other regarding teams that are very much in that same category that we really don't know who's better. Somebody's going to make a statement. And then that Louisiana-Texas game. It's a group of 5, but Texas in for all it can handle, certainly at home, in a game that is very much for people that say games are made by matchups. This a matchup, not necessarily a positional groups, but one program that's loaded with the tradition, the history, the facilities, the money, and the talent that's been recruited to the roster versus the true team that has played together a long time, brings back a ton of experience, a ton of productivity, leads the nation in amount of productivity coming back. And will they catch a more talented team still trying to figure things out, just having named a starting quarterback? Or will that talent and that Texas ability be able to override some of the inexperienced issues and getting acclimated to a new coaching staff and all of that? So it's a fascinating matchup from that standpoint.
Oh, it really is, Mark. And I think, you wouldn't be crazy if you said that Texas is going to start 0-2, right? I mean, in Arkansas, sort of kind of middle of the pack, maybe lower tier SEC right now. But I think some of the things that I've heard is, heard from coming out of them is, they've looked really good in fall camp. So, yeah, I mean, I think, I think Texas is going to go ahead and win those two games. But to your point, Mark, I mean, it could be a little bit of a struggle early on, specifically, your very first game with a new program, new installing, a new, your identity, your culture, your stamp on the program, and you have to go play a top 25 team your very first game. I think if Stark had it his way, he'd like to, have, maybe a lower tier group of 5 team, or maybe even an FCS team, just to kind of get his feet wet a little bit, kind of coming into the season. But there's no rest for the weary. So you look at that team, and they're very good. I think their starting running back is the only guy that they lost, from that 2020 season. So yeah, no, I think it's you have a lot of maybe not a concern, but I think you've got a lot of worry for Texas coming into those 2 tough games to start the season.
Jason, I thought you would lose some people with that number 5 ranking.
Yeah, I hope I didn't lose too many people, and it's not I don't want people to feel like this is really just an over the top overreaction. I just think there's so many dominoes that could potentially fall looking at this right now, in the running back perspective. Just looking at that, it's something that we would have to look at, Mark. I would venture to guess there would be very, very few teams in the country that only have 2 scholarship running backs on their team. I mean, so I don't want to overreact from one perspective, but the other perspective, it's undeniable that that this is going to be something that's going to be of concern at some point in the season. I had mentioned it's been 6 years since Oklahoma has had their top two running backs production-wise play in every single game, and that was 2015. So while it could happen, certainly it could happen. They could have both of these kids play every single game this year and play at a very high level. And this won't be a concern, but the odds of that happening are very small.
And once again, if I heard that correctly, your top 25 is the 25 best teams in the country as it stands right now, not taking the schedule into consideration. You believe these are the 25 best teams in the country, Alabama being the best, Clemson being the second best, on down the line.
That's correct, yeah.
That's one way to do it. People do it all over the place, and I think that most people at least approach it this way, or they perceive it this way, that's a prediction for the end of the season. Much like I made a top 25 months and months ago that stirred some people up because they felt as though I was not considering this game and that game and this team's schedule. And I was just listing out who I believe to be the top 25 teams in the country in order, not taking the schedule into consideration. So very interesting there, as we will start to find out, of course, starting technically this Saturday involving the contenders, you would think starting the Saturday following.
Yep.
All right. A lot of talk. I will address one question, and if Jason wants to chime in as well. Somebody had asked, with, of course, Clemson and Georgia playing on week 1, excuse me, this is a question that's been asked a number of times, and I've addressed it. Who does loss hurt more? Which team is this game more important for? These are my 2 lines of thinking. One would be that because of Clemson's schedule, Clemson does not play a ranked team in the regular season after Georgia. Things could change, but they don't see North Carolina. They don't see Miami in the regular season. They will be a double-digit favorite unless things drastically change, a double-digit favorite in every game this season after Georgia. So Clemson will certainly have a lot more opportunity to recover, meaning that they're probably not going to be threatened. Not that they can't get upset like they have in the past by Syracuse or Pitt or somebody like that. But if they lose to Georgia, they're going to be a prohibitive favorite to still run the table in the ACC and go to the championship game. So they can't afford another loss, most likely, but it's unlikely that they're going to be threatened. As opposed to Georgia, if they lose to Clemson, they're looking at a typical SEC schedule that doesn't necessarily provide challenges from teams that are considered as good as them, but I would argue a number of challenges from teams that are much better than what Clemson's going to have to face week to week. There's still going to be teams Georgia's going to be a significant favorite against, but teams like Kentucky and Florida and Auburn that are capable. And then also Georgia's going to have to deal with that SEC championship game. That's going to be Alabama, Texas A&M, or LSU. That's going to be more formidable than what Clemson has to face. I will say that as long as the loser does not lose convincingly, if they lose a classic, then they're still going to be in decent shape in the eyes of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. They evaluate the play on the field. And if you lose the 38-35 game, let's say if you're Georgia and Clemson marches through the season at 13-0, then you're still going to hold your ranking.
No, I mean, I completely agree with you, Mark. I mean, I think Clemson has the better ability to bounce back from a loss, early on than Georgia does, and I don't mean it from the perspective that they can bounce back more easily in terms of the team, but I think from a schedule perspective, I think you look at that and think that Georgia, certainly they have Florida, and then they would have, I know they go to, and I don't have the schedule in front of me, I think they go to Auburn, not incredibly high on Auburn this year, but and then you got an SEC championship game to maneuver as well. So whereas you have Clemson, they have, and you got to stretch for some games that they might run into problems. Maybe at NC State might be a little bit of a problem. At Pittsburgh you could stretch that into maybe a little bit of a problem, and then towards the end of the season, if they face up with North Carolina or Miami, whoever that might be, in the ACC championship. But I think the path to a playoff is much easier for Clemson than it is for Georgia.